Phuoc Tuy Province. Early morning, 1966. The jungle is wet from the night rain. Leaves drip. Mud pulls at boots. A small patrol moves ahead. Not American, no radio chatter, no helicopters overhead. Army colonel watches from a distance. He has spent years studying doctrine, firepower, mobility. He believes he understands jungle war, but what he is seeing does not fit the manuals. 6 men, spread wide, moving slowly. They stop. They wait. They listen. Minutes pass. Then more. The colonel checks his watch. They still have not moved. This is not hesitation. It is my intention. Later, when the patrol is gone, he writes nothing official. No report. No recommendation. But in a private notebook, he begins to take notes. Because he has just seen a different way to fight a war. If you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. Phuoc Tuy Province. June, 1966. Early morning. Mist clings low to the jungle floor. The air smells of wet leaves and rot. Boots sink slightly into soft ground with every step. Somewhere above, insects hum. No birds move. The forest is awake but cautious. 6 men move through the trees. They do not speak. They do not rush. They do not follow a trail. Army colonel watches from a concealed position behind them. He is not part of the patrol. He is an observer, sent to understand how Allied units operate in this war. He has spent most of his career studying doctrine, logistics, and firepower. He believes wars are won by control and momentum. What he is seeing feels slow, almost uncomfortable. The Australian patrol spreads out naturally as it moves, 5 to 8 meters between each man. No fixed pattern, just enough distance to survive a sudden contact without losing control. Their movement is deliberate, feet placed carefully, weight shifted slowly, rifles held low but ready. The colonel checks his watch. They stop. Not suddenly, not nervously. One man simply halts. The others freeze in sequence, as if connected by wire. No signal is spoken. A slight hand movement is enough. Minutes pass. The colonel feels the urge to move, to reposition, to do something. This is not how American patrols operate. Doctrine emphasizes momentum. Keep moving. Control the initiative. Silence matters, but speed matters more. The Australians seem unconcerned with time. To understand why this matters, the colonel thinks back to how the war has unfolded so far. By 1966, the United States has committed heavily to Vietnam. Large formations, helicopter-borne assaults, artillery bases spread across the countryside. The goal is clear: find the enemy, fix him in place, and destroy him with superior firepower. It is a doctrine built on visibility. The Australians come from a different background. Their experience in Malaya and Borneo taught them that guerrilla war is not defeated by presence alone. It is defeated by understanding, by patience, by denying the enemy freedom of movement rather than chasing him. The colonel knows this in theory. Seeing it in practice is different. The patrol begins moving again, slowly, carefully. One man pauses to examine the ground. He kneels, touches the soil, then moves on. Nothing obvious, nothing dramatic, just attention. The colonel notices something else. There is no radio chatter. American patrols rely heavily on radios, constant communication, position updates, requests for support. The Australians carry radios too, but they are silent. Messages, if sent at all, are brief and rare. Every transmission risks detection. Noise discipline is absolute. Equipment is taped down. No metal rattles. No loose straps move freely. Even the men's movements seem rehearsed, though they are not rigid. This is habit, not performance. The patrol halts again. This time, it lasts longer. The colonel feels the strain in his own body. Knees stiff, muscles tense. He imagines what it must feel like for the men ahead, lying still in the heat, insects crawling freely, sweat pooling under gear. This is not comfort, this is endurance. What surprises him most is not the silence, it is the confidence. These men are not cautious because they are afraid. They are cautious because they are in control. Each man trusts the others to do exactly what is needed without being told. Trust replaces speed. The Viet Cong patrol they are observing never knows it is there. It passes through the area along a familiar route. Confident, relaxed. Weapons carried casually. These men have moved through this jungle for years. Americans usually arrive loudly, by helicopter or armored convoy. There is time to hide or disengage. This time, nothing happens. The Australians do not engage. They do not signal artillery. They do not shift position aggressively. They watch. They count. They memorize. The colonel expects action, a report, a call for support. None comes. This is first contact without contact. Later records will show that Australian SAS patrols typically operate in teams of 4 to 6 men. They move slower than any American unit would tolerate, sometimes less than a kilometer per hour. The reason is simple. Speed creates noise. Noise creates compromise. The Australians accept fatigue as the cost of invisibility. The colonel begins to understand that this patrol is not hunting. It is mapping behavior, learning patterns, where the enemy feels safe, when he relaxes, how he moves when he thinks no one is watching. The symbol that defines this moment is silence. Not silence as emptiness, silence as discipline. The jungle itself seems to respond, leaves settle. Insects resume their rhythm. The patrol blends into the background so completely that even the colonel struggles to track them with his eyes. Hours later, the patrol withdraws the same way it arrived. No sign remains. No footprints left obvious. No broken branches. The jungle closes behind them. The colonel does not file a formal report that day. There is no box for what he observed, no metric to measure it, no enemy casualties to record, no ground taken. But something has shifted. In his private notebook, he writes carefully. Short lines. Observations, not conclusions. He understands that this approach cannot be applied everywhere. The American war is larger, louder, more complex. But he also understands that effectiveness is not always visible. The Australians are not trying to win the war in a single moment. They are shaping it quietly, day by day. As the sun rises higher, the jungle returns to normal. Birds move again. The illusion of peace resumes. But the colonel knows now that the quiet hides intent. And that sometimes the most important lessons in war are learned not through action, but through watching those who choose not to act. Phuoc Tuy Province. Midday heat. The jungle changes as the sun climbs, mist burns away, shadows shorten. The air thickens until breathing feels like work. Sweat runs freely now, soaking uniforms and softening leather. The Australian patrol is already moving again. They do not rush to escape the heat. They accept it. Heat is constant here. Fighting it wastes energy. Each man carries his load evenly balanced. Ammunition spread across the body, water secured tightly. Nothing swings, nothing clinks. Army Colonel follows at a distance, accompanied by a liaison officer. He has been told to observe, not interfere. That instruction proves harder than expected. Every instinct tells him this patrol is exposed. 6 men, no immediate fire support, no helicopters overhead, no artillery plotted in advance. If contact occurs, extraction will take time. Yet the patrol leader shows no sign of concern. Spacing adjusts subtly as terrain changes. In thicker vegetation, the distance closes. In open stretches, it widens again. No shouted commands, no hand signals exaggerated for clarity, only brief, controlled gestures. This is not silence born of fear, it is silence born of trust. The colonel recalls American patrol briefs. Clear objectives, timelines, phase lines, contingencies stacked upon contingencies. The Australians carry objectives too, but they are flexible. Their primary goal is survival and information, not engagement. This mindset is foreign to many American officers in 1966. War effort depends on contact. Enemy bodies counted. Engagements recorded. Progress measured through numbers. A patrol that sees the enemy and does not fight him feels incomplete. The Australians do not share this pressure. They are not here to be seen. The patrol halts again. This time they stay motionless for nearly 30 minutes. Knees pressed into damp earth. Backs hunched. Eyes scanning narrow arcs. One man shifts slightly to relieve pressure, then freezes again. The colonel checks his watch twice. During the halt, the patrol leader studies the ground carefully. Disturbed leaves. Slight depressions in the soil. A broken stem, bent the wrong way. These are not fresh signs, but they tell a story. Movement within the last day. Likely regular movement. This is how patterns are built. Later Australian records describe how SAS patrols tracked Viet Cong units for days without being detected. They did not pursue aggressively, they paralleled. They waited. They learned when units rested, when they relaxed, when security dropped. Contact was chosen, not forced. The colonel notices how the Australians treat noise as a tactical enemy. Even breathing is controlled. Rifles are held away from vegetation. Packs are adjusted during halts, not on the move. Any unavoidable noise is timed to environmental sounds. A gust of wind, distant aircraft, the sudden call of birds. The jungle is not just terrain, it is cover. American units often fight the environment. The Australians work with it. The patrol moves downhill into a shallow valley. This is dangerous ground. Sound travels upward. Scent pools. Escape routes narrow. The colonel expects caution to turn into delay. Instead, the patrol moves more decisively. Downslope movement is faster. Shorter halts. Clear arcs of observation. Each man knows his responsibility without being told. The rear man checks back repeatedly, ensuring nothing follows. This discipline comes from training, but also from selection. Australian SAS soldiers are chosen for patience as much as aggression. They are expected to endure boredom, discomfort, and uncertainty. Many patrols end without contact at all. Success is measured by what the enemy never sees. The colonel realizes something important. This approach demands emotional control. It is harder to wait than to act, harder to let the enemy pass untouched, harder to return without visible results and trust that the unseen work matters. American doctrine rewards action. Australian doctrine rewards restraint. As the patrol reaches the valley floor, distant movement appears through the trees. A small Viet Cong logistics party, 2 men, unarmed except for sidearms, carrying rice. The Australians freeze. The colonel feels tension rise. This is an opportunity. 2 men, easy capture, valuable intelligence. In American units, this would be decisive. The Australians do nothing. The 2 men pass within 30 meters, close enough to hear breathing, close enough to smell sweat, close enough that any sudden movement would mean contact. Still nothing. The patrol leader watches carefully, counts steps, notes direction. The rice load tells him something. Supply routes, timing, frequency. This is information that lasts longer than a brief firefight. The symbol returns again. Silence. Not just the absence of sound, but the suppression of impulse. Hours later, the patrol withdraws along a different route, never retracing steps, never creating a predictable pattern. The jungle closes behind them once more. Back at base, the colonel listens to the debrief. It is calm, methodical, precise, no excitement. No exaggeration, just facts, numbers, directions, times, observations. The colonel compares this to American after-action reports, longer, louder, focused on contact and firepower. This report feels quieter, but deeper. He begins to understand why Viet Cong commanders describe these patrols differently, not as aggressive, not as overwhelming, but as unsettling. They cannot be predicted, they cannot be heard, they cannot be escaped. The Australians do not dominate terrain, they deny it. That night, as the jungle cools and insects rise again, the colonel writes in his notebook. He does not yet know how these lessons will be applied, but he knows they matter, because in a war where visibility defines survival, the side that masters being unseen holds an advantage no firepower can replace. Late afternoon, Phuoc Tuy province. The light begins to flatten. Shadows stretch longer between trees. This is the hour when mistakes happen. Eyes grow tired. Muscles stiffen. Sound carries farther than expected. The Australian patrol slows again. This time, the pause feels different. The patrol leader studies the ground with care. Fresh signs now. A boot print, sharp-edged. A snapped twig still wet inside. Someone passed recently. Very recently. The men do not bunch up. They spread slightly, each man owning a narrow slice of jungle. Rifles come up, but not aggressively. No finger rests on a trigger. Control comes first. Colonel senses the shift. This is no longer observation alone. This is proximity. American doctrine teaches rapid reaction to contact. Speed, volume, dominance. The Australians approach it differently. Contact is not an event. It is a decision. They move forward in short bounds. One man advances while the others watch. Each step is placed deliberately, heel first, weight rolling gently. Even in tension, noise discipline holds. The jungle ahead feels crowded, though nothing is visible. Imagine standing there, knowing someone is close, knowing they do not know you are there. This is the moment where fear either takes control or sharpens the mind. The Australians remain calm. They are not braver than other soldiers. They are simply trained to sit with uncertainty. Training reports from the Australian SAS emphasize this repeatedly. Mental endurance matters more than physical strength. A man who panics gives away position. A man who rushes creates noise. The patrol halts again. Through a break in foliage, movement appears. A Viet Cong security element, 4 men. Rifles slung loosely, they move casually, talking quietly among themselves. They are relaxed. This tells the patrol leader everything he needs to know. There is a larger unit nearby. Security is thin, confidence is high. The Australians do not engage. They observe spacing. Roughly 10 meters between men. Poor rear security. The trail is well used but not heavily watched. This is not a unit expecting trouble. The patrol withdraws a few meters, then circles. They are not avoiding contact. They are shaping it. Australian SAS after-action reports from this period show a consistent pattern. Patrols would study enemy habits for days, sometimes weeks, before striking. They learned when weapons were stacked, when men cooked, when sentries relaxed. The jungle becomes a ledger of routines. As darkness approaches, the Australians settle into position near a likely trail junction. It is a natural choke point, low ground, limited visibility. Sound funnels inward. The men prepare quietly, each movement deliberate, magazines checked silently, rifles angled down to avoid silhouettes, faces darkened with mud, not paint. Paint smells, mud does not. The colonel watches from a short distance away, his own breathing suddenly loud in his ears. He understands now why Americans struggle here. This kind of warfare demands patience that doctrine alone cannot teach. The symbolic sound returns again. Silence, not empty silence, loaded silence. Minutes pass, then footsteps. A larger Viet Cong unit moves into the junction. 8 men, armed, relaxed. They talk softly, unaware they are surrounded by unseen eyes. The Australians wait until spacing collapses, until movement funnels inward, until escape routes overlap. Then contact happens. It is brief, violent, controlled, 2 suppressed shots, immediate, precise. The rest of the patrol reacts instantly, but confusion reigns. They do not know where fire came from. They do not know how many attackers there are. The Australians do not pursue aggressively. They fire only when necessary. Each shot has purpose. Within seconds, the jungle goes still again. No shouting, no prolonged firefight, no chase. The Australians withdraw immediately, peeling back through pre-planned routes. They leave behind confusion, not pursuit. The colonel feels his heart rate only now begin to slow. American units often seek decisive engagement. Maximum damage, ground held, victory declared. This was different. The Australians were never there to dominate. They were there to remind the enemy that nowhere is safe. Viet Cong accounts later described these encounters as deeply unsettling. Units would report being attacked without warning, by unseen forces, then finding nothing to pursue. No footprints, no sound, no trail. The term ghosts appears in multiple Vietnamese recollections, not as myth, but as frustration. The enemy could not be fixed. This changes behavior. Security tightens, movement slows, units bunch up, supply routes shift, commanders grow cautious. All of this reduces operational freedom. Back at base, the colonel studies the map again. He realizes the Australians have influenced a wide area with very few men, not through firepower but through uncertainty. Special Forces thinking, though at the time it remains unconventional. The colonel writes again. He reflects on American reliance on helicopters, artillery, and numbers. These tools are powerful, but they create signatures, sound, predictability, patterns. The Australians create absence. That night, intelligence reports arrive. Viet Cong units have altered movement schedules. Patrols doubled security elements. Supply movement delayed. No major battle occurred. Yet the battlefield shifted. The colonel understands now why Australian patrols generate such psychological impact. They do not just kill, they impose doubt. And doubt spreads faster than fear. As the jungle settles again, cicadas rising in volume, the Australians rest quietly. Rifles cleaned, equipment checked. No celebration, no visible emotion. This is simply work. Work done in silence. Work that echoes far beyond the moment of contact. Dawn breaks softly over Phuoc Tuy province. Mist hangs low in the trees. The jungle breathes out the night. Moisture beads on leaves and runs down bark in slow lines. Somewhere far off, a bird calls once, then stops. The Australian patrol is already moving. They left their night position before first light. Not because they were afraid of pursuit, but because staying too long invites patterns. Patterns invite detection. Each man knows the drill. Spacing returns to 5 to 10 meters. Heads down, eyes forward and to the sides. No one looks back unless assigned. Trust replaces reassurance. This is how Australian SAS patrols operate. They assume the enemy is always watching, even when no one is visible. Colonel follows again, quietly, careful not to disturb the rhythm. He notices how little the Australians speak. Hand signals handle most communication. When words are needed, they are whispered and brief. American patrols often rely on radios. Radios mean power. Power means weight. Weight slows movement and increases fatigue. Radios also emit signals. Signals can be tracked. The Australians keep radio use minimal. Messages are short, sometimes delayed until extraction. Silence remains their primary shield. By mid-morning, signs appear that something has changed. The trail ahead is different now. Boot prints are tighter together, more frequent, no longer casual. Someone has reinforced movement discipline. The patrol leader kneels and studies the ground. He does not need to explain what he sees. The others understand. The enemy is reacting. This is the real effect of Australian operations, not body counts, not captured weapons, behavioral change. Vietnamese records later confirm this pattern. After repeated encounters with Australian SAS patrols, Viet Cong units in Phuoc Tuy adjusted routes, increased sentries, and limited movement during low visibility periods. This slowed logistics and strained manpower. The Australians have forced the enemy to spend more effort just to survive. The patrol alters direction, slipping away from the trail and moving parallel instead. They do not want to be predictable. They want to observe how the enemy adapts. This patience reflects a deeper mindset. Australian SAS doctrine emphasizes influence over destruction. Their goal is not to fight the jungle, it is to use it. Every tree, every depression, every sound becomes part of the operation. The colonel notes how often the Australians stop without obvious reason. They listen, not just for footsteps, but for rhythm. The jungle has a natural tempo. When it breaks, something is wrong. Suddenly the patrol freezes. A distant metallic sound carries through the trees, a rifle sling buckle, accidental contact with gear. Someone is nervous. The Australians lower themselves slightly, reducing silhouette. Weapons come up, but still no one rushes. The patrol leader signals a halt and waits. Minutes pass. Nothing happens. The sound does not repeat. This restraint is critical. American units often respond to uncertainty with movement or fire. The Australians respond with stillness. Later, intelligence confirms what the patrol suspected. Viet Cong security teams were repositioning early that morning, reacting to previous losses. Their nerves were tight, their discipline strained. Fear has entered their system. Fear changes behavior in predictable ways. It causes overcorrection. It leads to tighter formations and louder movement. It reduces initiative. The Australians understand this well. By midday, the patrol reaches a vantage point overlooking a small clearing used for logistics transfer. No movement today. Empty. The enemy has paused operations. The colonel realizes the significance. A handful of men, moving quietly, have disrupted an entire network without engaging it directly. This is economy of force at its highest level. In American reports, success is often measured in engagements. In Australian records, success is often measured in absence. No contact, no movement, no supply flow. The jungle itself becomes the report. As the patrol withdraws again, the symbolic sound returns. The absence of sound where there should be activity. Silence, once more. Back at the Australian base, debriefing is short and unemotional. Patrol members report observations. Routes altered, enemy caution increased. No dramatization. The colonel attends quietly. He notices how junior soldiers speak freely. Rank exists, but ego does not dominate. Experience matters more than authority. This culture shapes outcomes. Australian SAS selection and training emphasize independence and judgment. Patrol leaders are trusted to make decisions without constant oversight. This allows flexibility in the field. American units often operate under tighter command structures. This ensures coordination, but can slow adaptation. Neither approach is wrong, but in this environment, one fits better. The colonel reflects on his own doctrine. Firepower is strength, but it draws attention. Helicopters provide speed but announce arrival. Artillery delivers dominance but reshapes terrain. The Australians reshape behavior instead. This forces the enemy into a defensive posture, even in areas they once controlled. It creates uncertainty in command decisions. Supply officers hesitate. Unit leaders delay movement. All of this reduces pressure on friendly forces elsewhere. The colonel writes again in his notebook. Later, captured Viet Cong documents will echo these observations. They note increased stress among troops assigned to Phuoc Tuy. This stress matters. Fatigued soldiers make mistakes. Mistakes lead to exposure. The Australians do not need to win every fight. They only need to make the enemy tired. As evening approaches, the patrol prepares for extraction. They move to a landing zone chosen days earlier. Not obvious, not convenient. Safe. The helicopter arrives briefly, rotors beating the air. Noise breaks the jungle's calm. Then it is gone again. The silence returns. The colonel watches the aircraft disappear and understands something fundamental has shifted. Not just in his view of the Australians, but in his understanding of counterinsurgency. Victory here is not loud. It is quiet, persistent, and deeply unsettling to the enemy. The jungle closes in again, unchanged in appearance but altered in meaning. It remembers. Late afternoon, again. The heat presses down, heavy and familiar. Sweat darkens uniforms. The jungle hums with insects and distant movement. This is the hour when exhaustion sets in, when discipline is tested not by fear, but by fatigue. The Australian SAS patrol is on the move once more. This patrol is smaller, 5 men, lighter loads, no unnecessary equipment. Each man carries only what he must: water, ammunition, food stripped of excess packaging. Even rations are chosen for silence. Colonel observes carefully. This reduction is not weakness. It is intent. Australian patrol doctrine favors fewer men when conditions allow. Smaller patrols leave less trace. They move faster, quieter, and with greater control. They also require deeper trust. Every man covers more ground. Every mistake matters. The patrol moves in a staggered file, 5 to 8 meters between men. The point man scans low and forward. The second man watches flanks. The rear man looks back, always. No one drifts. No one daydreams. Imagine carrying 60 pounds through this heat. Imagine knowing a single snapped twig could undo days of work. This is endurance measured not in speed, but in restraint. The colonel notices something else. The Australians do not rush extraction windows. They are willing to miss them. American units often operate on strict timelines driven by air availability. The Australians plan around uncertainty. They accept delay as a cost of survival. Training records from the Australian SAS show a strong emphasis on autonomy. Patrol leaders are trained to operate without guidance for extended periods. Decisions are expected to be made on the ground, not deferred upward. This mindset shapes behavior. As the patrol halts near a dry creek bed, signs appear again. Fresh tracks, multiple sizes. A mixed unit, possibly local force, not regulars. The patrol leader signals a halt and kneels. The men sink into the ground, becoming shapes rather than figures. The creek bed offers concealment. Shade cools the body slightly. They wait. This waiting is not passive. Each man runs possibilities through his mind. Ambush locations, withdrawal routes, noise sources. Stress is constant but controlled. Psychological strain builds quietly. There is no release valve here, no firefight, no clear resolution, just vigilance. This is the cost of this style of warfare. Australian veterans later describe long patrols as mentally draining in ways combat alone could not match. Fear is sharp but brief. Uncertainty is dull and endless. The patrol chooses not to engage. The enemy passes nearby, unaware. The Australians do not move a muscle. The colonel feels the tension release only after the moment is gone. He understands now that restraint requires as much discipline as aggression. Back at base, he begins formalizing his observations, not as critique, as study. His notes focus on principles rather than techniques. These ideas will later surface in American counterinsurgency discussions, though often adapted to larger formations. The seed, however, is planted here. The Australians do not seek to export their methods. They do not lecture. They simply operate, and others notice. American Special Forces teams begin experimenting with smaller patrols, increased emphasis on noise discipline, longer observation missions, reduced reliance on immediate fire support. Results vary. The environment matters. Culture matters. Training pipelines differ, but the influence spreads quietly. The symbolic sound appears again. Silence after movement. The jungle returning to normal before anyone realizes something passed through it. This is the Australian signature. As the patrol completes its mission, extraction comes late. The men are tired, feet blistered, shoulders sore. No one complains. They understand why they are here. The colonel speaks later with Australian officers. Not formally, no doctrine exchange, just observation and respect. He realizes that the Australians fight as if every patrol matters because, for them, it does. With fewer men and limited resources, waste is unacceptable. This creates a culture of care. Care for planning, care for execution, care for each other. The Australians do not chase medals. Their success is measured in returning unseen. This philosophy shapes their legacy. Viet Cong accounts continue to mention the Australians long after major engagements fade. Not because of battles, but because of presence. Or rather, the threat of presence. An enemy that cannot be found, cannot be ignored. As the colonel prepares to leave Vietnam, he reviews his notes one last time. He does not romanticize what he saw. He understands its limits. This style cannot be scaled endlessly. It depends on elite training, trust, and environment. But its lessons endure. War is not always about force. Sometimes it is about pressure applied so quietly that the enemy feels it everywhere. The jungle, unchanged in appearance, holds these lessons in its memory. Footprints fade, sounds vanish, but behavior remains altered. This is how influence works when done properly, not loudly, not visibly, but deeply. Night returns to Phuoc Tuy province. Not suddenly. Gradually. The light thins, colors fade. The jungle compresses inward until depth disappears and distance becomes guesswork. This is when fear settles deepest. The Australian SAS patrol moves slowly through the dark, guided by memory more than sight. Night vision devices are limited in this period. They rely on spacing, touch signals, and trust. One wrong step could snap a branch. One careless movement could end the patrol. They move anyway. This is the environment where Australian methods reach full effect. Darkness strips away technology. It rewards discipline and preparation. The patrol leader counts steps silently. He knows the ground. He memorized it during daylight. This is not bravery. It is planning. American units often avoid deep movement at night without heavy support. Artillery illumination, air cover, sensors. These tools work, but they also announce presence. The Australians prefer darkness uncontested. They halt near a known enemy route. No ambush tonight. Only listening. Imagine lying still in wet soil. Insects crawling across exposed skin, muscles locked to avoid sound, hours passing without movement. This is endurance without witnesses. Across the province, Viet Cong units also move at night. But now, they move differently, tighter, slower, less confident. This change is documented in later Vietnamese accounts and captured reports. Night movement becomes stressful. Sentries double. Sleep shortens. Fear has altered the rhythm of their war. The Australians do not need to strike to be effective. Their reputation does the work for them. Units that expect contact behave cautiously. Cautious units lose tempo. Lost tempo means missed opportunities. This is strategic impact achieved tactically. Colonel understands now why Australian patrols appear in enemy reports far out of proportion to their size. Fear magnifies presence. He reflects on American strengths. Firepower, logistics, scale. These win wars at the national level. But they do not always shape the daily psychology of the battlefield. The Australians operate at that level. As dawn approaches, the patrol withdraws without incident. No shots fired, no enemy seen, yet the mission is successful, because the enemy stayed awake all night. Back at base, intelligence summaries arrive. Increased reports of nervous discharges, accidental engagements between Viet Cong units, movement delays, command complaints about exhaustion. Fear creates friction. Friction breaks systems. This is the lasting effect of Australian operations. The symbolic sound returns one last time, the absence of sound where confidence once lived. The colonel prepares to rotate home. His notebook is full. Observations, not conclusions. He knows doctrine cannot simply be copied. Environment matters. Culture matters. But principles endure. Silence as a weapon. Patience as power. Fear applied indirectly. These ideas will surface later in American special operations thinking, sometimes openly, sometimes without attribution. That is how lessons travel in war, quietly. Years later, veterans on both sides will remember these patrols. Australians will recall long hours of stillness, the weight of responsibility, the trust required to survive unseen. Vietnamese veterans will recall uncertainty, routes avoided, nights feared, a sense that the jungle itself was hostile. Neither memory is exaggerated. The Australians did not win the war alone. No unit could. But they shaped a piece of it in a way few others did. Not through dominance, through disruption. The jungle remains. Trees regrow, trails fade. But behavior once changed does not easily return. This is the real legacy of the Australian SAS in Vietnam. Not myth, not legend, but pressure applied so carefully that it lingered long after the patrols were gone. Fear leaves marks, not on maps, not in headlines, but in how soldiers move, think, and sleep. And that, in war, is often enough. Morning comes quietly. No sunrise spectacle, no dramatic break in the clouds, just a slow return of light filtering through leaves that have seen too much already. The jungle looks unchanged, but it is not the same jungle it was months ago. Patterns have shifted. Australian SAS patrols continue to move through Phuoc Tui, but now their presence is felt more in absence than in action. Trails once busy are quiet. Supply routes bend away from certain areas. Units pause longer before moving. This is influence without footprints. The Australians have not increased their numbers. They have not expanded their bases. They have not demanded attention, yet their effect has grown. S-Colonel studies updated intelligence overlays. The map tells a story that gunfire never could. Enemy movement corridors have narrowed. Rest areas have moved closer to populated zones, where concealment is harder. Patrol schedules show longer gaps. The enemy is adapting again. But adaptation comes at a cost. Viet Cong commanders now require more men for security. That means fewer men available for operations elsewhere. More time is spent guarding trails than planning attacks. Fatigue compounds. Australian patrols exploit this indirectly. They do not chase the changes. They let them settle. Then they observe again. This cycle repeats. Observe. Disturb. Withdraw. Observe again. It is slow. It is deliberate. And it works. Training documents from the Australian SAS stress this approach. Influence must be sustained, not spectacular. A single dramatic operation may impress, but repeated quiet pressure reshapes behavior. The colonel compares this to American operations he has witnessed. Large-scale sweeps, clear and hold missions, fire bases established and defended. These efforts are necessary, but visible. Visibility invites response. The Australians remain difficult to target because they rarely present themselves. The symbolic object returns again, subtle but constant. The sound of the jungle after a patrol has passed. Birds resume. Insects continue. Nothing appears disturbed, but human movement has changed. That contrast matters. The Australians understand that guerrilla warfare is as much about psychology as terrain. When the enemy feels watched, even when alone, confidence erodes. Vietnamese veterans later described this sensation in simple terms. Not fear of battle, but fear of surprise. Fear of never knowing when the fight would start. That uncertainty drains morale. Australian patrol leaders are aware of this effect. They plan missions not around enemy strength, but enemy routine. They ask different questions. Where do they feel safe? When do they relax? What do they assume? These assumptions become vulnerabilities. The colonel notes how often Australian patrols avoid success that would draw attention. They bypass targets that seem too easy. They withdraw when they could press advantage. This restraint is counterintuitive, but restraint preserves anonymity, and anonymity preserves influence. As American advisors begin to rotate through the region, some notice the difference. Areas with Australian patrol activity show fewer engagements overall, yet intelligence quality improves. Locals are less pressured by enemy presence. Movement feels freer, though danger remains. This is not victory, it is relief. The Australians do not claim credit. They do not brief press officers. Their operations rarely make headlines. Their reward is space. Space for others to operate. Space for local forces to move. Space for intelligence to breathe. The colonel understands that this kind of impact rarely fits neatly into reports. It does not translate into graphs or numbers easily. But it changes outcomes. He reflects on future conflicts, different terrain, different enemies, but similar human behavior, fear, fatigue, overreaction. These patterns repeat. The Australians have shown that a small force, if disciplined and patient, can shape a battlefield far larger than itself. Not forever, not everywhere, but enough. As months pass, some Viet Cong units redeploy away from Australian patrolled areas. Others dig in, becoming static. Both choices reduce their effectiveness. Static units are predictable. Avoidant units concede ground. Either way, initiative shifts. The jungle holds on to this tension. Even when patrols are not present, the possibility remains. That possibility becomes a constant weight. This is the unseen cost imposed by Australian operations. At the end of his tour, the colonel closes his notebook. He does not label it a doctrine manual. He sees it as a record of observation. War does not reward imitation without understanding, but it does reward learning. Years later, elements of these ideas will surface in American Special Operations units. Emphasis on small teams, signature management, psychological impact. not always traced back to this place, but the lineage exists, quietly. The Australians return home eventually. Many carry little recognition. Their stories are not loud. They are often shared only among those who were there. Yet their influence lingers in how modern forces think about presence and pressure. The jungle forgets slowly. Footprints vanish first, then trails, then camps. But behavior changes last. This is what the Australian SAS left behind in Vietnam. Not monuments, not myths, but altered habits in the enemy's mind. And in warfare, that can shape everything that follows. Years later, the jungle looks the same. Green closes in on itself. Trails vanish beneath new growth. The sounds return to what they were before the war. Birds, insects, wind moving through leaves. On the surface, nothing remains. But war does not end when the shooting stops. It ends when behavior changes back. In Phuoc Tuy province, some changes never fully did. Veterans on both sides would later describe the same feeling using different words. Australians spoke of patience learned the hard way. Vietnamese veterans spoke of caution that never left them. Even in peace, some routes still felt unsafe. Some habits stayed. That is the quiet difference left behind. The Australian SAS did not win Vietnam. No single unit could. But they demonstrated something that outlived the conflict. They showed how fear, applied carefully, could shape a battlefield without overwhelming it. This mattered to those who watched closely. S. Colonel, long since retired, would later speak in measured terms about what he observed. He did not exaggerate. He did not mythologize. He described discipline. He described restraint. He described how a small force could force a larger enemy to think differently. Those ideas traveled, not quickly, not cleanly, but steadily. In later decades, American Special Operations Doctrine would place greater emphasis on signature management, psychological pressure, and small unit autonomy. The language changed, the environments changed, but the core principles echoed what had been seen in that jungle. Silence as protection, patience as strength, presence felt more than seen. The Australians understood something fundamental about irregular war. Killing the enemy matters, but controlling how the enemy moves, rests, and thinks can matter more. This is not romantic. It is practical. Every extra sentry costs manpower. Every delayed movement costs time. Every night without sleep costs judgment. Over time, these costs accumulate. That accumulation weakens forces more reliably than any single engagement. The Australian SAS applied pressure in small, precise amounts. They did not seek collapse. They sought imbalance. That imbalance forced reactions. Reactions created friction. Friction slowed everything. This is how a few men altered the tempo of a much larger conflict, even if only in one province. The symbolic sound returns one final time. Silence. Not empty silence, but controlled silence. The kind that makes soldiers listen harder. The kind that forces decisions to be delayed. The kind that lingers in memory. For the Australians, silence was survival. For the Viet Cong, it became uncertainty. For observers, it became instruction. The jungle did not care who learned the lesson. It simply rewarded those who respected it. Australian patrols learned to move with it, not against it. They accepted discomfort. They accepted isolation. They accepted that success might never be visible. That acceptance shaped everything they did. They carried lighter loads not to move faster, but to move quieter. They used fewer words not to seem elite, but to reduce risk. They avoided contact not out of fear, but to choose the moment that mattered. These are not dramatic choices. They are disciplined ones. In war, discipline often looks boring. Long waits, repeated checks, decisions not to act, but discipline is what endures. The Australian SAS left Vietnam without parades or headlines. Many returned to civilian life quietly. Their stories were not always told. When they were often understated. That understatement fits their legacy. They were never meant to be seen. Yet their impact was real, not in territory held, not in battles named, but in the way the enemy moved differently long after the patrols were gone. Fear does not always scream. Sometimes it whispers, and whispers can travel far. This is why the Viet Cong feared the Australian SAS more than many larger forces, not because of numbers, not because of firepower, but because the Australians made the jungle feel uncertain, even when it was quiet, even when nothing happened, even when no one was there. That is influence without footprints. And in the long history of war, it is one of the hardest forms of power to counter.